Hello and welcome to another session of Groundbreakers Live. I'm your host Javed Mohammed, and I'm very honored to have with us Sean Scott, who's a principal consultant and an Oracle ace. Sean, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. And we were talking off camera, but I have to say it on camera now. You have a strong resemblance to Neil Armstrong. Has anyone ever told you that?
No one has ever told me that before, no. Bruce Willis, yes, but Neil Armstrong, no. But I'm flattered.
Either way, it's a good pick. All right.
It is.
So let's move from space to here down on Earth. So we were talking again off camera about what would be some interesting conversation to have based upon your expertise. And what we to discuss is how DevOps makes databases more reliable. So I thought perhaps we can just start off. I mean, each of the fields are huge. Obviously, databases have been around for a long time. And DevOps, I don't know how many years it's been, 8, 10 years as a movement. Well, first of all, what's your take on it? Where do you think we are at in terms of adoption of DevOps?
I think that DevOps gets a bad rap. So you have some shops that have adopted it and are using it, I would say, properly or appropriately. You've got folks who might not be using it very well and maybe give it a bad name. And then you have environments where they're running under the same structure and procedures that they have been for years.
Okay. So there are a lot of open source software out there. I mean, some of the older ones like Chef and Puppet, and then a whole bunch, that are more recent. I mean, so from a maturity of technology standpoint, where do you see with that? Is it from an adoption? Is the challenge more with the tools, or is it more about the culture?
Yeah, I think it's definitely more about the culture. They're very mature. They definitely get done what you want them to do, and you have a lot of options. But it is a cultural thing because, like I said, you have some environments where DevOps isn't practiced well, and it's given DevOps a bad name. I'll go to conferences and I'll mention DevOps, and there's always somebody who will roll their eyes. But I was very fortunate to work on a team that did DevOps so well that it changed my mind and it converted me into a believer and an advocate for it.
So can you share maybe some examples of what is it that when you worked in this team, what is it that jived so well that made it work?
I think it was a top-down culture that we had where management bought into it, and we had a director in this environment who allowed engineers to make decisions and configure things according to what they knew to be best. So the company recognized that the engineers were experts in the field. And when it came to saying, do you want to use Puppet or Chef? We sat down, we made decisions. Ultimately, in that shop, we chose Puppet and integrated into things. And then the other thing was, once we found a tool and we had buy-in from the team as a whole, we stuck with that rather than bouncing around from one thing to another.
Okay. So onto the subject of like the connection of DevOps and the databases. So how does DevOps, I've never quite heard that context before, of how does DevOps make databases more reliable? Give us a window into that.
Yeah, so if you're looking at a traditional shop, even if it's a DevOps shop, it's very likely that you have engineers who are running the majority of your infrastructure according to the methods and practices that you might call best practices. I'm not a real fan of that word, but then you end up with the people on the database side, and databases tend to be outliers to the process. Database administrators tend to, and this isn't a criticism of DBAs by any means, and I'm a DBA myself, but we tend to just kind of hold on tight to our databases and our hosts. And we don't want those hosts to be manipulated by tools like Puppet. We don't want to have jobs running against them to update configurations, and that's understandable. So we do things manually, or we make notes about things and how machines are set up. But when you look at the bigger picture of managing the reliability of your environment, if you lose a data center or if you lose a database host and you don't have a really accurate inventory of all of the kernel settings, of all of the packages that were installed, all the changes and configurations that were made, how do you rebuild that database host? You can't. So you go from scratch and you try to remember or go back to whatever documentation you have and do that process. But again, it's manual. Whereas if you have an automation pipeline, if you've got a tool like Puppet, if you're using Terraform, Ansible to build out your hosts, well, you just kick off that script, point at whatever that new hardware is, it builds it for you, it's provisioned, and now you can get down to the business of restoring your database. So you see this in cloud environments. If you go and you build something in OCI, if you want to provision a cloud instance, you kick it off. That's a whole script that runs everything in the background. And you're going to get this consistent, reliable, wonderfully perfect environment every time that behaves exactly the same way.
Okay. Right.
And we need to bring that.
Okay. So basically,
I was just going to say.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, basically what I heard you say was that by obviously having a DevOps in play or process in play, it helps with the configuration, the provisioning, and that kind of sets the the foundation for having something which will be reliable and so forth. Anything else, perhaps? I guess I'm sure that when you have to use your word of shops, there's just so many black holes out there that anything that can get you. Anything else just to kind of aware of?
We still need to look at databases, I think, a little bit differently than the rest of infrastructure, but we should be approaching the procedures and the benefits of DevOps and integrating the database environment into that rather than just building a wall and blocking that whole technology suite and way of doing things out entirely.
Okay. Well, I think, Sean, if there's one thing I can say is you're definitely one more good voice out there who's making a case for DevOps, and I guess in a good and open world, that's all good.
Thank you.
All right then. Well, Sean, thank you so much for coming and sharing. And as I will end as I started, you're handsome. You do have a future in Hollywood, but I still think you'll make a great astronaut. Thanks, Sean. Take care.
Thank you so much.